Hi there. Just a quick note before we begin. This episode is based on selected excerpts from the Constitution of India, sourced from legislative.gov.in. The summary was generated with help from AI, so there might be occasional errors or omissions. This content is meant for informational and educational purposes only, not legal advice. For the complete and official version, please refer to the full Constitution on the Government of India's website.
Today we're tackling a big one, a listener request for, a complete overview of the Indian Constitution.
Yeah, it's foundational, isn't it, for the world's largest democracy? And definitely a monumental document.
Absolutely. And look, it's easy to feel maybe a bit overwhelmed by just how vast it is.
For sure.
Yeah.
So our goal today isn't, to memorize every single clause. It's more about getting a handle on the overall structure, the key parts, and the core principles.
Exactly. We want clarity in the main insights. We're drawing from the text itself, the Constitution of India in English.pdf, to keep things factual and hopefully engaging.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Where should we start? The preamble seems like the natural place.
Definitely. It sets the stage. What always strikes me is that opening.
We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved.
Yeah, that's powerful. It immediately tells you where the authority comes from.
Right, from the people themselves, not granted by anyone else.
It's a declaration of self-governance. And then it lays out these huge goals: sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and securing justice, social, economic, political, and liberty, of thought, expression, belief, faith, worship.
It's basically the mission statement. It sets the tone and the aspirations for the entire document that follows.
So a really powerful start. Where does the Constitution actually get down to the nuts and bolts after that?
Well, the logical next step is Part 2, which deals with citizenship. That's Articles 5 through 11.
Okay, citizenship. So this defines who counts as a citizen, right? Especially at the beginning.
Precisely. Article 5 sets out the criteria at the commencement of the Constitution. Things like being domiciled and born in India, or if your parents were born there, or if you'd been living there for at least 5 years right before it started.
Okay, so that covers the initial group.
Then Articles 6 and 7 deal with the complexities arising from, the partition migration. Very specific circumstances there.
Right, a difficult time.
And Article 9 is important. It clarifies that if you voluntarily become a citizen of another country, you lose your Indian citizenship.
Makes sense. Establishes who belongs under this new framework.
And crucially, Article 11 gives Parliament the power to make laws about citizenship going forward.
So the rules aren't set in stone from 1950. Parliament can update them.
Exactly. It allows the law to evolve.
Okay, so we've established who we the people are in a legal sense. What's the next big section?
Part 3, Fundamental Rights. Articles 12 to 35. This is, arguably the heart of the Constitution for many people.
Absolutely. Fundamental rights. They're the bedrock. Let's start with the right to equality.
Yes. Articles 14 to 18, Article 14 kicks it off, equality before the law.
Meaning everyone's treated the same under the law, no special treatment.
That's the principle, rule of law. Then Article 15 digs deeper, prohibiting discrimination specifically on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth.
Okay. And Article 16, that's about jobs, right? Public employment.
Yes. Equality of opportunity in public employment. But it's also where the provisions for reservations come in.
Ah, right.
Okay.
Affirmative action.
Exactly. Clauses 4 and 4A, for example, allow the state to reserve posts for backward classes, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, if they're underrepresented. And Clause 6 now includes economically weaker sections, too.
So it's trying to balance formal equality with addressing historical inequalities.
Precisely. It's a complex balance. Then Article 17 is huge. The abolition of untouchability.
A direct attack on a major social evil.
Absolutely critical. And Article 18 follows up by abolishing titles like Maharaja or Rai Bahadur to further promote that sense of equality.
Okay, that's a solid foundation for equality. What about the right to freedom? That sounds pretty essential, too.
Definitely. That's Articles 19 to 22. Article 19 is the big one, listing freedoms like speech and expression, assembly, association, movement, residence.
The core freedoms you expect in a democracy.
Yes, but, and this is important, they aren't absolute. They're subject to reasonable restrictions.
Okay. What does reasonable restrictions mean in practice?
Well, clauses 2 to 5 of Article 19 spell it out. Things like protecting the sovereignty and integrity of India, security, public order, decency, morality, or preventing incitement to an offense.
So your freedom of speech doesn't mean you can yell fire in a crowded theater, basically.
Exactly, or incite violence.
Yeah.
Then Article 20 gives protections regarding conviction for offenses, things like no double jeopardy, no self-incrimination, fair trial stuff.
Got it. And Article 21, that's often cited?
Protection of life and personal liberty. Yes, it's huge. And the courts have interpreted life and liberty very broadly over the years.
How so?
Well, it's been held to include things like the right to privacy, the right to a clean environment, right to livelihood. It's really expanded. And then Article 21A, added later, specifically guarantees the right to education for children.
Right. Education as a fundamental right. What about Article 22?
That deals with protection against arrest and detention. It lays down procedures, like the right to be informed of the grounds for arrest, right to consult a lawyer.
And it limits preventive detention, right?
Yes. Generally, it can't exceed 3 months unless an advisory board approves it, though Parliament can prescribe longer periods and procedures in certain cases, as outlined in Clauses 4 and 7.
Okay, so safeguards against arbitrary state action. What's next after freedom?
The right against exploitation, Articles 23 and 24.
Sounds important. What does it cover?
Article 23 prohibits trafficking in human beings and forced labor, like Big R.
Forced labor. Okay.
Though it makes an exception for compulsory service for public purposes, like military conscription, but says the state can't discriminate when imposing such service.
So no forced labor, unless it's for a public purpose and applied fairly.
Pretty much. And Article 24 tackles child labor, prohibiting employment of children below 14 years in factories, mines, or other hazardous jobs.
Protecting children. Good. Now, moving into potentially more sensitive territory, freedom of religion.
Right. Articles 25 to 28. Article 25 guarantees freedom of conscience and the right to freely profess, practice, and propagate religion.
But there are limits.
Yes. Explicitly subject to public order, morality, and health. And also to the other fundamental rights.
Okay, so your religious practice can't harm others or disrupt public order.
That's the idea. Article 26 gives religious denominations the freedom to manage their own affairs in matters of religion.
And Article 27.
Freedom from being forced to pay taxes for promoting any particular religion helps maintain a degree of separation between state finances and religion.
Right. What about religion in schools?
Article 28 deals with that. Generally, no religious instruction in state-funded schools. In others, attendance is voluntary. There are nuances, especially concerning institutions established by religious minorities, which links to Article 30.
Article 30 gives minorities the right to establish their own educational institutions, doesn't it?
Yes, that's under cultural and educational rights, Articles 29 and 30. Article 29 protects the interests of minorities, ensuring they can conserve their distinct language, script, or culture.
And Article 30, as you said, gives them the right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice.
Exactly. There's even a specific clause, 1A, added to ensure fair compensation if the property of a minority educational institution is compulsorily acquired.
So, specific protections for minorities. Now, wasn't there a right to property originally in this part?
There was, yes. It used to be Article 31. It caused a lot of legal and political debate. It was removed as a fundamental right by the 44th Amendment in 1978.
So where is it now?
It's now Article 300A in Part 12. It's still a constitutional right, meaning you can't be deprived of your property except by authority of law, but it's not a fundamental right anymore.
Okay, that clarifies that. What comes after the fundamental rights?
Part 4, Directive Principles of State Policy, Articles 36 to 51.
Now, these are different, aren't they? They aren't enforceable in court like fundamental rights.
That's the key difference. They are fundamental in the governance of the country, directions to the state, but you can't sue the government for not implementing them directly.
So they're more like guiding principles, aspirations.
Exactly. Aspirations for a just society. For example, Article 38 talks about securing a social order for the promotion of the welfare of the people. Article 39 lists principles like adequate means of livelihood, equitable distribution of resources, equal pay for equal work.
So economic and social goals.
Yes. Article 39A pushes for equal justice and free legal aid. Article 40 encourages organizing village panchayats, local self-government.
Okay.
Well, Article 41 mentions the right to work, education, public assistance in cases of unemployment, old age, sickness. Article 42 focuses on just and humane conditions of work, maternity relief. Article 43 aims for a living wage for workers.
Sounds like a comprehensive vision for welfare.
It is. There's Article 43A on worker participation in management, 43B on promoting cooperative societies. Article 44 is the one that directs the state to secure a uniform civil code for all citizens.
Ah, yes. That one comes up often.
It does. Article 45 deals with early childhood care and education. Article 46 focuses on promoting the educational and economic interests of weaker sections, particularly SCs and STs.
Public health.
Article 47 talks about raising nutrition levels in public health. Article 48 on organizing agriculture and animal husbandry. Article 48A specifically on protecting and improving the environment and safeguarding forests and wildlife.
Protecting heritage, too.
Article 49, protection of monuments and places of national importance. Article 50 aims for the separation of the judiciary from the executive.
And internationally.
Article 51 promotes international peace and security. So you see, it's a broad sweep of socioeconomic and political goals.
A roadmap for the state, even if not legally binding in the same way as fundamental rights. Okay, where does this massive document take us next?
Part V, the Union. Articles 52 to 151. This details the structure and functioning of the central government.
Right, the federal level. Let's unpack this. It starts with the executive.
Yes, Articles 52 to 78. Article 52 simply states, there shall be a President of India. Article 53 vests the executive power of the Union in the President.
So the president is the formal head of the executive.
Correct. Although Article 74 clarifies that there's a council of ministers with the prime minister at the head to aid and advise the president, who generally acts according to that advice.
The parliamentary system in action. What about the vice president?
Article 63 establishes the office, and Article 64 makes the VP the ex officio chairman of the Council of States, the Rajya Sabha.
A dual role. Any specific powers of the president mentioned here?
Article 72 covers the power to grant pardons, reprieves, etc. Very significant power. Article 73 outlines the extent of the Union's executive power.
And the Council of Ministers.
Article 75 has key provisions, like the Prime Minister being appointed by the President and other ministers appointed on the PM's advice. Clause 5 has that rule.
The 6-month rule?
Yeah, that a minister who isn't an MP must become one within 6 months or cease to be a minister.
Okay. Who else is part of the Union executive structure here?
Article 76 provides to the Attorney General for India, the government's chief legal advisor. Articles 77 and 78 deal with how government business is conducted.
Right, so that's the executive. What about the legislature? Parliament.
That's the next big chunk, Articles 79 to 122. Article 79 constitutes Parliament, consisting of the President and the two houses.
The Council of States, Rajya Sabha, and the House of the People, Lok Sabha.
Exactly. Detailed in Articles 80 and 81. Article 81 also deals with the composition of the Lok Sabha, including the allocation of seats to states based on population, though there is that freeze on readjustment until after the first census post-2026.
So seat numbers are fixed for now. What does it take to become an MP?
Qualifications are in Article 84. Need to be a citizen, at least 30 for Rajya Sabha, 25 for Lok Sabha, and meet other qualifications Parliament might prescribe.
And how does Parliament operate? Sessions?
Article 85 covers sessions, prorogation, ending a session, and dissolution, ending the life of the Lok Sabha. Then you have articles about the officers, chairman and deputy chairman for Rajya Sabha, Article 89, speaker and deputy speaker for Lok Sabha, Article 93.
What about rules inside the houses?
Article 99 is the oath or affirmation MPs take. Article 100 deals with voting, quorum the minimum number needed to conduct business. Articles 101 to 104 cover disqualifications.
Disqualifications, like what?
Article 102 lists grounds, like holding an office of profit, being of unsound mind, insolvent, not being a citizen, or being disqualified under any law made by Parliament, which crucially includes the anti-defection law in the 10th schedule. Article 103 says the president decides on disqualification questions after consulting the Election Commission.
Okay. And MPs have certain protections?
Yes. Article 105 grants privileges and immunities, most famously freedom of speech within Parliament. Article 106 deals with salaries and allowances.
How does a law actually get made? The procedure?
Articles 107 and 108. Generally, a bill can start in either house, needs to be passed by both. Article 108 provides for joint sitting if there's a deadlock between the two houses, except for money bills.
Ah, money bills. They're special.
Yes. Articles 109 and 110. They can only originate in the Lok Sabha. The Rajya Sabha has limited powers. It can suggest amendments, but can't reject or amend a money bill outright. It has only 14 days to return it.
So Lok Sabha has the upper hand on financial matters.
Definitely. Articles 112 to 117 detail the financial procedures, the annual financial statement, the budget, appropriations, grants, etc. It mentions the Consolidated Fund of India, where all government revenues go.
Okay, a lot on Parliament. Does the president have any lawmaking power outside of this?
Yes, Article 123. The power to promulgate ordinances when Parliament is not in session. These have the force of law but must be approved by Parliament once it reconvenes.
A temporary legislative power. Now the third pillar, the judiciary.
The Union Judiciary, Articles 124 to 147, primarily about the Supreme Court.
Establishment and judges.
Article 124 covers the establishment, constitution, appointment, and removal of judges. Qualifications are in Clause 3. Article 125 deals with salaries, 126 and 127 with acting Chief Justice and ad hoc judges.
I remember reading about the National Judicial Appointments Commission.
Right, Articles 124A, B, and C were introduced for that, but they were struck down by the Supreme Court itself, so the collegium system for appointments effectively continues.
Interesting. What kind of court is the Supreme Court?
Article 129 declares it a court of record, meaning its proceedings are recorded and it can punish for contempt of itself. Article 130 specifies its seat, which is Delhi.
And its powers, jurisdiction.
Article 131 gives it original jurisdiction in disputes between the Union and states, or between states. Articles 132 to 134 cover its appellate jurisdiction hearing appeals from high courts. Article 139 allows Parliament to confer power to issue writs. Article 139A allows transfer of certain cases.
Can it review its own decisions?
Yes. Article 137 grants the power of review. Article 142 is also very important. It gives the court power to pass any decree or order necessary for doing complete justice in any matter before it.
A very broad power for justice.
Extremely broad. Article 143 allows the president to consult the Supreme Court on questions of law or fact. Article 144 requires all authorities, civil and judicial, to act in aid of the Supreme Court.
So the Supreme Court sits right at the top of the judicial system. What comes after the judiciary in Part V?
The Comptroller and Auditor General of India, the CAG. Articles 148 to 151.
The government's auditor.
Exactly. Article 148 covers appointment and removal. Article 149 details duties and powers auditing the accounts of the Union and the states. Article 150 deals with the form of accounts, and 151 requires the CAG's reports to be laid before Parliament and state legislatures.
The financial watchdog, ensuring accountability. Okay, that wraps up the union structure. What about the states?
That's Part 6, Articles 152 to 237. It largely mirrors the union structure, but at the state level.
Okay, so parallel institutions.
Pretty much. Article 152 defines state for this part. Then you have the executive, Articles 153 and 167, covering the governor appointed by the president, state executive power, council of ministers headed by a chief minister, the advocate general for the state.
So governor instead of president, chief minister instead of prime minister.
Right. Then the state legislature, Articles 168 to 212. Some states have two houses, legislative assembly and legislative council. Others just one legislative assembly. It covers composition, qualifications, sessions, officers, procedures. Again, very similar to Parliament.
And the governor has ordinance power too.
Yes. Article 213 gives the governor the power to promulgate ordinances when the state legislature is in session, similar to the president's power.
And the state judiciary.
The high courts in the states, Articles 214, 231, covers their constitution, appointment of judges, jurisdiction, power to issue writs, similar to the Supreme Court under Article 226, control over subordinate courts.
Subordinate courts.
Yes, Articles 233, 237 deal with the district judiciary and below appointment of district judges controlled by the High Court.
So a comprehensive structure for state governance as well. What about areas that aren't full states?
Part 8 covers the Union territories, Articles 239 to 243. Deals with their administration, usually by the president through an administrator. Article 239AA has special provisions for Delhi, giving it a legislative assembly and council of ministers, but with limitations.
Okay. Now, you mentioned local government earlier with the directive principles.
Right, and the Constitution was later amended to give local bodies constitutional status. That's Parts 9X, IXA, and IXB.
Part 9.
Articles 243 to 243O deal with the panchayats, rural local self-government. Covers their constitution, composition, elections, powers, finances. A three-tier system in most states.
And Part IXA.
Articles 243 to 243ZG cover the municipalities' urban local self-government. Similar structure, constitution, wards committees, reservations, elections, powers, finance commission, planning committees.
Empowering government right down to the village and town level. What's Part IXB?
That's about the cooperative societies, Articles 243ZH to 243ZT, added later to promote democratic functioning and autonomy of co-ops. Covers incorporation, elections, audits, meetings, etc.
Okay. What about specific regions like tribal areas?
Part X, Article 244, addresses the scheduled and tribal areas. It refers to the 5th and 6th schedules for detailed administrative provisions.
The 6th schedule is particularly important, right?
Yes, it provides for administration of tribal areas in Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, and Mizoram, setting up autonomous district councils with significant powers.
So special arrangements for certain areas. Now, how do the union and states actually interact? The relationship.
That's crucial. Part 11, Articles 245 to 263. Relations between the Union and the states.
Federalism in action.
Exactly. Chapter 1, Articles 245-255 deals with legislative relations. This is where the distribution of powers comes in.
The famous lists.
Yes. Article 246 distributes legislative power based on the 3 lists in the 7th schedule. List 1, Union list Parliament exclusive. List 2, state legislature exclusive normally. And List 3, concurrent list both can legislate. Residuary powers belong to Parliament, Article 248.
So who can make laws on what? What about administration?
Chapter 2, Articles 256 to 263 covers administrative relations. Things like the obligation of states to comply with union laws, unions' power to give directions to states, cooperation between union and states, provisions for interstate councils, Article 263, to resolve disputes.
Okay, defining the operational relationship. What about money matters between them?
Part 12, Articles 264 to 300A, finance, property, contracts, and suits. This is key for fiscal federalism.
How does it work?
Articles 264-291 deal with finance, distribution of revenues, taxes levied and collected by the union but assigned to states, like Article 269, taxes levied and collected by the union but shared with states, Article 270, grants and aid from the union to states, Article 275.
And the GST.
Right. The goods and services tax regime required significant amendments here, including Article 279A, which establishes the GST Council to make recommendations on GST rates, rules, etc. Clause 4 outlines its functioning, Clause 9 its decision-making requiring a 3/4 majority.
Complex financial arrangements. What else is in Part 12?
Borrowing powers of the Union, Article 292, and states, Article 293. Then provisions regarding property, contracts, rights, liabilities, obligations, and suits, Articles 294-300. And as we mentioned, Article 300A, the right to property, sits here now.
Okay. What's Part 13 about?
Trade, commerce, and intercourse within the territory of India, Articles 301 to 307. Article 301 declares that trade, commerce, and intercourse throughout India shall be free.
Free trade within the country.
Yes, but Parliament can impose restrictions in the public interest, Article 302, and states can impose non-discriminatory taxes, Article 304. So freedom with regulations.
Got it. What about government employees? The bureaucracy.
Part 14th, Services under the Union and the States, Articles 308 to 323, covers recruitment, conditions of service for civil servants. A major part is dedicated to the Public Service Commissions Union, UPSC, and state, SPSCs.
What do they do?
Articles 315, 323 cover their appointment, functions, like conducting exams for recruitment, removal of members. They are meant to ensure merit-based recruitment, though Article 320 proviso allows government to make regulations specifying matters where PSC consultation isn't necessary.
Okay. Are there other bodies for dispute resolution?
Yes, Part WEVA, Articles 323A and 323B, allows Parliament to set up tribunals for specific matters, like service disputes, administrative tribunals, or tax issues, to reduce the load on high courts.
Makes sense. Elections are obviously fundamental.
Absolutely. Part XVA, Elections, Articles 324 to 329A.
And this establishes the Election Commission.
Yes, Article 324 vests the superintendent's direction and control of elections to Parliament, state legislatures, President, VP, in the Election Commission. Clause 2 deals with its composition. It guarantees universal adult suffrage, Article 326. It also bars court interference in electoral matters like delimitation.
A powerful, independent body for free and fair elections.
Hugely important. Next, Part 66. Special provisions relating to certain classes, Articles 330 to 342A.
What kind of provisions?
Primarily reservations. Article 330 reserves seats for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in the Lok Sabha. Article 332 does the same for state legislative assemblies. These were initially for 10 years, but have been extended periodically.
Any other groups?
There were provisions for Anglo-Indian representation, Article 333 nomination by governor, but those have lapsed. It also establishes the national commissions for scheduled castes, Article 338, scheduled tribes, Article 338A, and backward classes, Article 338B, outlining their duties and powers. Article 342A deals with the process for specifying socially and educationally backward classes.
So mechanisms for representation and safeguarding interests. What about language? India has so many.
Part 7. Official language, Articles 343 to 351. Article 343 declares Hindi in Devanagari script as the official language of the Union, with English continuing for specified purposes. It also covers official languages for states, language for communication between states and the Union, and language of the courts.
Supreme Court and High Courts.
Article 348 says proceedings in the Supreme Court and High Courts shall be in English until Parliament provides otherwise. There are also directives for the development of Hindi.
A complex linguistic landscape. Now, what happens in times of crisis?
Part 8. Emergency Provisions, Articles 352 to 360. Very significant powers.
What kinds of emergencies?
3 types. Article 352 deals with national emergency, proclaimed if the president is satisfied there's a grave threat to security due to war, external aggression, or armed rebellion. Importantly, it requires written communication from the Union Cabinet now and needs parliamentary approval within 1 month.
What are the effects?
Article 353 outlines the effects, including extension of Union executive power and Parliament's power to legislate on state subjects. Fundamental rights under Article 19 can be suspended, and Article 20 and 21 can never be suspended.
What's the second type?
Article 356. Proclamation in case of failure of constitutional machinery in a state, commonly known as President's Rule, allows the president to assume state government functions. Highly controversial sometimes.
And the third?
Article 360. Financial emergency if the financial stability or credit of India is threatened. Never invoked so far.
Okay, powerful provisions for exceptional circumstances. Are we nearing the end?
Almost. Part K&LX is miscellaneous, Articles 361 to 367. Contains various provisions like protection for the president and governors from legal proceedings, Article 361, bar on court interference in disputes arising out of certain pre-Constitution treaties, Article 363, and importantly, Article 366 provides definitions for key terms used throughout the Constitution.
Definitions like?
Oh, things like existing law, federal court, goods, high court, Indian state. Newer definitions like goods and services tax and socially and educationally backward classes have been added too.
Useful for interpretation. How can this whole thing be changed? Amended?
That's Part XX, just one article, Article 368, Amendment of the Constitution.
How does it work? Is it easy?
Not entirely. It outlines the power and procedure. Most provisions require a special majority in Parliament, a majority of the total membership of each House, and a majority of not less than 2/3 of the members present and voting.
And some require state ratification?
Yes. Amendments affecting federal features like the distribution of powers, representation of states in Parliament, the Supreme Court, high courts, or Article 368 itself also need ratification by the legislatures of at least half the states.
So a fairly rigid process, especially for core features. What's Part XE1?
Temporary, transitional, and special provisions, Articles 369 to 392. Includes temporary powers for Parliament, Article 369, provisions regarding existing laws, Article 372, courts, officers. It also contained Article 370 regarding Jammu and Kashmir, and Articles 371 to 371J contain special provisions for certain states like Maharashtra, Gujarat, Nagaland, Assam, etc.
Okay, handling the transition and specific state needs, and the very last part.
Part 22, Articles 393 to 395. Short title, Commencement Authoritative Text in Hindi and Repeals. Article 393 gives the short title, This Constitution may be called the Constitution of India. Article 394 specifies the commencement date. Article 395 repealed the Indian Independence Act 1947 and the Government of India Act 1935.
Phew. We made it through the parts and articles, but there are schedules too, right?
Yes, the schedules provide details that supplement the articles. They're integral.
Can you give us a quick rundown?
Sure. First schedule lists the states and union territories. Second schedule deals with salaries and emoluments of high officials. Third schedule contains the forms of oaths and affirmations.
Like the oath a minister takes.
Exactly. For instance, a minister for a state swears to bear true faith and allegiance, uphold sovereignty and integrity of India, faithfully discharge duties, and do right to all manner of people without fear or favor, affection, or ill will.
Okay. Fourth schedule.
Allocation of seats in the Council of States, Rajya Sabha, to each state and union territory. Fifth schedule deals with administration and control of scheduled areas and scheduled tribes outside the sixth schedule areas.
And the sixth, we mentioned tribal areas in the Northeast. Seventh.
That's the crucial one with the union list, state list, and concurrent list, detailing the legislative powers. Eighth schedule lists the recognized official languages of India.
Ninth schedule. That one's unique, isn't it?
It is. It was added to protect certain laws placed in it from judicial review on grounds of violating fundamental rights, although the Supreme Court has held that laws added after 1973 can still be reviewed if they violate the basic structure.
10th schedule.
The anti-defection law, aiming to curb floor crossing by legislators. 11th schedule lists the subjects that panchayats can handle. 12th schedule lists the subjects for municipalities.
So the schedules flesh out the details. And appendices.
They usually contain things like the text of constitutional amendment acts and related orders.
Wow. Okay, that was definitely a deep dive. We've covered an incredible amount of ground.
We really have. From the preamble's vision to citizenship, the crucial fundamental rights and directive principles, the detailed structure of the union and state governments, the judiciary, the distribution of powers, elections, special provisions. It's a lot.
It really is. And it's clear that each part, each article, carries immense weight and has layers of interpretation and history behind it.
Absolutely. This overview hopefully gives you, the listener, a solid framework, a map, if you will. But the real depth comes from exploring specific areas that interest you.
Definitely. It's a living document. So maybe a final thought to leave our listeners with.
Just maybe consider how these structures and principles laid down decades ago but amended over time continue to operate and shape the reality of India today, the world's largest democracy. It's worth thinking about how this framework impacts everyday life, governance, and rights.
A great point. There's always more to explore in the Constitution itself. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
My pleasure.